June 17, 1943. The sweltering heat of the Pacific sun beat down on Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, as Lieutenant Commander John Blackburn wiped sweat from his brow and gazed skeptically at the new aircraft being unloaded from the transport ship. The ungainly Vought F-4U Corsair, with its distinctive inverted gull wings, looked more like a mechanical curiosity than the savior of American air superiority. What Blackburn couldn't possibly know was that this supposedly useless plane would soon achieve the most lopsided kill ratio of any fighter aircraft in the history of aerial warfare. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable tale of how an aircraft initially derided as dangerous, unreliable, and practically worthless transformed into the most lethal fighter of World War II, reshaping not only the pilots who flew it, but also the very course of the Pacific War through a combination of industrial might, engineering brilliance, and raw American determination. Lieutenant Blackburn watched as the crane carefully lowered the first Corsair onto the crushed coral runway. The aircraft's massive 13-foot propeller dwarfed those of the Wildcats lined up nearby. Ground crew scrambled to secure the new arrival, their expressions mirroring Blackburn's own skepticism. "She's a beast," remarked Chief Petty Officer Raymond Torres, the squadron's senior mechanic. "Either the greatest fighter ever built or a death trap with wings. I guess we'll find out which." Blackburn had good reason for concern. Reports from stateside testing facilities painted a troubling picture of an aircraft plagued with problems. Yet with the war situation growing increasingly desperate and Japanese air power still dominating the skies over the Solomon Islands, the Marines had little choice but to accept what the Navy had rejected. "Beggars can't be choosers," Blackburn muttered as he approached the aircraft for a closer inspection. The Japanese Zero had reigned supreme in the Pacific skies since December 7, 1941. With its incredible maneuverability, impressive 12-to-1 climb rate, an operational range of over 1,600 miles, the Mitsubishi A6M dominated the early air war. American pilots in their outdated F-4F Wildcats could only manage desperate defensive tactics against the superior Japanese fighters, which outnumbered them and outperformed them in nearly every category. The Zero had achieved near-mythical status among Allied pilots. The brainchild of designer Jiro Horikoshi, it represented a revolution in fighter design when it first appeared in 1940. Weighing only 3,700 pounds empty, nearly a ton lighter than comparable American fighters, it could turn inside any opponent, climb faster, and range farther than any carrier-based fighter in the world. Its combat debut over China in 1940 had resulted in astonishing claims of 27 enemy aircraft destroyed without a single loss. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Commander C. Jasper Skidmore had compiled a dossier on the Zero that made for grim reading. "Pilots who attempt to dogfight with the Zero will not survive," he warned in a tactical bulletin distributed throughout the Pacific Fleet in early 1942. The Zero can complete a 360-degree turn in approximately 12 seconds, nearly 5 seconds faster than our F-4F Wildcat. This advantage in turn radius means the Zero can establish a firing position against any aircraft that attempts to engage it in a turning fight. "They fly circles around us," Captain Jefferson Davis of VMF 214 wrote in his combat diary on April 3, 1943. "We have to dive in, make one pass, and get the hell out before they catch us. The Zero can outclimb, outturn, and outrun anything we have. They know it, and worse, we know it." The psychological impact of fighting from a position of inferiority was devastating to pilot morale. Lieutenant James Sweat of VMF 221 recalled in a letter home, "You never feel safe up there. You're always looking over your shoulder, always defensive. That's no way to win a war." The psychological toll manifested in various ways. Some pilots developed what flight surgeons termed operational fatigue, a combination of insomnia, heightened startle responses, and deteriorating performance. Others adopted a fatalistic outlook, convinced that their survival was more a matter of luck than skill. "We had guys who carried all sorts of good luck charms," remembered Captain Harold Rosenberg, a flight surgeon attached to VF-10. "Playing cards, rabbit's feet, girlfriend scarves, religious medals. Anything to feel like they had some control over their fate. The strain was particularly evident among squadron commanders, who bore the burden of leading increasingly inexperienced pilots against a superior enemy. Commander John Thatch, who developed the defensive Thatch Weave tactic to help Wildcat pilots survive Zero attacks, described the pressure in his private journal. Sent 2 new kids out today. Both had less than 300 hours total flight time. Anderson didn't come back. Lewis crash-landed, aircraft total loss. But he'll fly again tomorrow if the medics clear him. How do you build confidence when you're always on the defensive? How do you build experience when so few live long enough to become experienced? Marine Corps psychiatrist Major Franklin Halberton conducted a study of fighter pilots in the South Pacific in early 1943, concluding, "The constant knowledge of inferior equipment creates a pervasive sense of helplessness that undermines even the most naturally aggressive pilots." Many report dreams of being trapped or chased. The psychological advantage currently enjoyed by Japanese pilots due to superior equipment may be as significant as the technical advantage. The United States Navy and Marine Corps desperately needed a fighter that could challenge Japan's air superiority. The answer came in an unlikely package, a prototype so troublesome that many test pilots refused to fly it. The Vought F-4U Corsair had first flown in May 1940. Powered by the massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, the most powerful aircraft engine in the world at that time. To handle this enormous power plant, designers created the distinctive inverted gull wing, allowing for a shorter, more durable landing gear while still providing clearance for the massive 13-foot propeller. The engineering challenges had been formidable. The R2800 engine produced so much torque that conventional propellers would literally tear themselves apart at full power. Vought engineers collaborated with Hamilton Standard to develop a new 3-bladed propeller spanning 13 feet 4 inches, the largest ever fitted to a fighter aircraft at that time. The inverted gull wing, which gave the Corsair its distinctive profile, was born of practical necessity rather than aesthetic choice. Test engineer Paul Baker explained the logic. With an engine that large, you need a propeller that large. With a propeller that large, you need substantial ground clearance. With conventional landing gear, that means extremely long and vulnerable struts. The inverted gull wing let us mount the landing gear at the lowest point of the wing, keeping the struts short and strong while still giving us the propeller clearance we needed. The aircraft's remarkable performance came at a cost of tremendous complexity. The Corsair contained 14,672 unique parts, compared to 9,800 in the Grumman F-6F Hellcat and only 5,100 in the Japanese Zero. The control system alone required 492 separate parts. This engineering marvel represented a leap in fighter design and manufacturing. On paper, the Corsair was revolutionary. It was the first American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour in level flight, reaching speeds of 417 miles per hour during testing, a full 20 miles per hour faster than the newer Grumman F-6F Hellcat, and nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the Japanese Zero. Yet when carrier qualification trials began in September 1942, disaster struck. The long nose of the Corsair severely restricted forward visibility during landing approaches. The left wing had a tendency to stall before the right wing, causing deadly spins. The cockpit was set so far back that pilots couldn't see the deck during landing. Worse still, the landing gear often collapsed under the strain of carrier landings. The carrier trials aboard USS Sangamon were nothing short of catastrophic. Of the 8 prototypes that began carrier qualification testing, 3 were destroyed in landing accidents. Test pilot Lieutenant Commander Sam Porter described the harrowing experience in his official report. Aircraft bounced violently on touchdown, veered left, and struck parked aircraft before coming to rest. Cause determined to be asymmetrical stall characteristics combined with excessive landing speed necessitated by poor forward visibility. Another test pilot, Lieutenant Walter Leeper, narrowly escaped death when his Corsair caught a late arrestor wire, but then experienced complete hydraulic failure, causing the landing gear to collapse. The aircraft skidded 90 feet across the deck, shedding parts before stopping just 6 feet from the edge. Leeper emerged with only minor injuries. But his report was damning. Aircraft exhibits dangerous characteristics during carrier approach and landing. Forward visibility so restricted that pilot must perform S-turns during final approach, a procedure impossible to standardize and extremely hazardous in combat conditions. Commander Frederick Trapnell, head of the Navy's Flight Test Division, reluctantly recommended against carrier deployment after reviewing the test results. The F-4U-1 possesses performance characteristics superior to any fighter currently in naval service, he wrote. However, its handling characteristics during the critical phases of carrier operations present hazards that cannot be mitigated through normal pilot training. Pilot workload during approach and landing is excessive, creating an unacceptable risk of operational losses. Lieutenant James Flatley, one of the Navy's most experienced test pilots, was even more blunt. Great airplane, wonderful fighter, but it will kill a lot of kids. If we put this thing on carriers right now, we'll lose more pilots to operational accidents than to enemy action. The medical department's input further sealed the Corsair's fate as a carrier aircraft. Flight Surgeon Commander Wesley Brown analyzed pilot stress levels during simulated carrier approaches and found that Corsair pilots exhibited physiological stress indicators 38% higher than pilots flying other naval aircraft. Heart rate, respiration, and galvanic skin response all indicate extreme stress levels during landing phase, Brown reported. Sustained operations under these conditions will lead to rapid pilot fatigue and increased accident rates. Admiral John Towers, commander of the Pacific Fleet Air Force, was blunt in his assessment. This aircraft is entirely unsuitable for carrier operations. It represents an unacceptable risk to pilots and deck crews alike. I cannot in good conscience authorize its deployment aboard our carriers. The decision reverberated through the highest levels of naval command. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, convened an emergency meeting with the Bureau of Aeronautics and Vought representatives on October 15, 1942. The transcript reveals a tense exchange. King, gentlemen, we have a situation. The Navy has invested millions in an aircraft it cannot safely operate from carriers. What are our options? Captain Arthur Radford, sir, we have three choices as I see it. 1. We can cancel the program entirely and write off the investment. 2. We can delay carrier deployment while Vought addresses the deficiencies, which their representatives estimate will take 12 to 18 months. 3. We can reassign the aircraft to land-based operations. Commander George Henderson, Vought, Admiral, I must emphasize that the Corsair's performance advantages are substantial. It would be premature to abandon the program when solutions to the carrier landing issues are being actively developed. King, I appreciate your optimism, Commander, but we're fighting a war now, not next year. Captain Radford, what's the status of the F-6F Hellcat? Radford, the Hellcat has completed carrier trials successfully. Performance is slightly below the Corsair, but still superior to the Zero. Grumman can begin deliveries next month. King, and what about the Marines? Could they use the Corsair from land bases? Brigadier General Lewis Woods, Marine Aviation, the Marines could certainly use the performance advantages of the Corsair, Admiral. Our airfields in the Solomons are under constant attack. We need every edge we can get. King, then it's settled. The Hellcat becomes our primary carrier fighter. The Corsair goes to the Marines for land-based operations. Captain Radford, work with Vought to continue development. If they can solve the carrier landing issues, we'll revisit the decision. In the meantime, not one more Navy pilot dies trying to land that thing on a carrier. The decision would prove fateful for both the Navy and the Marines. While the Hellcat would go on to achieve an impressive 19-to-1 kill ratio of its own, the rejected Corsair, in the hands of Marine pilots desperate enough to master its quirks, would achieve the highest kill ratio of any American fighter in the war. The Bureau of Aeronautics had ordered 584 Corsairs at a cost of $50 million, equivalent to nearly $850 million in 2025. With carrier deployment now forbidden, the Navy faced a potential financial and tactical catastrophe. Rather than scrapping the program entirely, a desperate compromise was reached. The useless Corsairs would be diverted to the Marine Corps for land-based operations, while Grumman ramped up production of the more carrier-friendly F-6F Hellcat. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, who would later command the famous Black Sheep Squadron, remembered his first encounter with the Corsair. "They wheeled this thing out, and I thought they were playing a joke on us. The nose was so long you couldn't see what was in front of you. The cockpit was cramped, the controls were stiff, and it bounced like a kangaroo on landing. The mechanics couldn't keep them running for more than a few hours without something breaking. We called it the Ensign Eliminator." But desperation breeds innovation. With Japanese air superiority threatening the entire Pacific campaign, Marine pilots had no choice but to make the Corsair work. VMF 124 became the first squadron to receive the Corsair in February 1943, led by Major William Guise. Their early experiences were disastrous. During the first 2 weeks of operations, the squadron lost 7 Corsairs, but only 1 to enemy action. The others fell victim to mechanical failures, landing accidents, and pilot error. Technical Sergeant Roy Halvorsen, a mechanic with VMF 124, kept detailed logs of the early problems. Oil leaks from the reduction gear housing, 17 aircraft. Engine overheating during ground operations, 23 aircraft. Landing gear collapse on rough field, 4 aircraft. Canopy jamming during flight, 6 aircraft. Hydraulic system failures, 12 aircraft. The situation was so dire that a delegation of pilots, led by Captain Thomas Riley, formally requested a return to their old F-4F Wildcats. "At least in a Wildcat, you know you'll make it back to base if the enemy doesn't get you," Riley argued. "In a Corsair, you're fighting the plane as much as the Japanese." Major Guise denied the request. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns," he told his pilots. "But VOD is producing 150 Corsairs a month now, and that number is climbing. The Grumman factory can't keep up with our losses. It's the Corsair or nothing." What followed was an unprecedented collaboration between frontline pilots, mechanics, and VOD engineers who were dispatched to the Pacific to solve the Corsair's problems. Working in primitive conditions, often within earshot of enemy artillery, they methodically addressed each flaw. The carburetor air intake was redesigned to prevent engine flooding during negative G maneuvers. The hydraulic lines were reinforced and rerouted to prevent combat damage. The wing stall characteristics were improved by adding a small strip of wood, known as a stall strip, to the leading edge of the right wing, causing both wings to stall simultaneously. Lieutenant Alexander Vrashew, who would later become the Navy's 4th-ranking ace, recalled, "We were essentially test pilots in a combat zone. Every day brought a new modification, a new procedure to try. You'd go up knowing that if the enemy didn't kill you, your own aircraft might." Yet even as the Corsair's reliability improved, pilots remained skeptical of its combat capabilities. The Zero still enjoyed a fearsome reputation, and many pilots doubted that any American fighter could match it. That perception changed dramatically on April 13, 1943, during a raid on Japanese positions at Kahili Airfield on Bougainville. A formation of 12 Corsairs from VMF 124 encountered 39 Japanese aircraft, a mix of Zeros, Val dive bombers, and Betty bombers. First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh, flying a Corsair he had named Irish, later described what happened. "We came in high, about 20,000 feet, with the sun at our backs. I saw the Zeros climbing to intercept, but they were still 5,000 feet below us. In the Wildcat, we'd have had to dive, make one pass, and run. But in the Corsair, I realized we had options. I radioed the squadron. Stay high, use your speed, don't dogfight." What followed was a revelation. The Corsairs dove on the Japanese formation, using their superior speed and dive rate to slash through the enemy aircraft, then zooming back up to altitude where the Zeros couldn't follow. Each Corsair pilot made multiple attack runs, using hit-and-run tactics instead of getting drawn into the turning fights where Zeros excelled. When the engagement ended, the Marines had shot down 11 Japanese aircraft while losing only 1 Corsair, which crash-landed with a wounded pilot who survived. The 11-to-1 exchange ratio sent shockwaves through both American and Japanese commands. Analysis of the combat revealed the Corsair's true potential. While the Zero could still outmaneuver the F-4U at speeds below 200 knots, the Corsair held every advantage at higher speeds. It could dive faster, climb higher, and most importantly, it could sustain damage that would have destroyed a Zero. The armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks of the Corsair meant that pilots could survive hits that would have been fatal in a Zero. The Japanese fighter, optimized for maneuverability at the expense of protection, had no armor and no self-sealing tanks. A single incendiary round in the right place could turn a Zero into a fireball. Lieutenant James Sweat, who would earn the Medal of Honor flying a Wildcat before transitioning to Corsairs, explained the psychological shift. Once you understood that you didn't have to outmaneuver them, that you could use your speed, diving power, and superior firepower, the whole equation changed. We stopped fighting on their terms and made them fight on ours. The industrial disparity between America and Japan quickly became apparent. By mid-1943, Vought was producing 220 Corsairs per month. Combined with Goodyear and Brewster, which were also manufacturing F-4Us under license, production reached over 350 aircraft monthly. In contrast, Mitsubishi's entire Zero production for 1943 totaled just 1,560 aircraft, barely 130 per month. Moreover, Japan was losing experienced pilots with each engagement, while the American pilot training program was producing 20,000 new pilots per year. Captain Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading living ace with 64 victories, noticed the change immediately upon returning to combat after recovering from serious wounds. In 1942, the American pilots were brave but inexperienced, he wrote in his memoir. By mid-1943, we faced not only better aircraft but also better pilots. Most concerning was their endless supply of both. When we lost a pilot, years of experience died with him. When they lost a pilot, 3 more took his place. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was devastating. Lieutenant Tadashi Nakajima of the 251st Air Group recorded in his diary in August 1943, "The Americans now attack with complete confidence. Their Corsairs come from above, make their pass, and climb away before we can respond effectively. They no longer fear us. This is a terrible development." The Corsair's armament further tipped the scales. While the Zero carried 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons with limited ammunition, the Corsair bristled with 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns carrying 2,350 rounds of ammunition. The Browning's rate of fire, 750 rounds per minute per gun, meant that a Corsair could deliver 75 rounds per second in a concentrated pattern. Technical analysis conducted by the Naval Air Weapons Station at China Lake revealed that a 1-second burst from a Corsair's guns delivered approximately 11,700 foot-pounds of energy to the target. The entire aluminum structure of a Zero weighed just 5,500 pounds, meaning a direct hit could transfer twice the energy needed to completely destroy the aircraft. Chief Petty Officer Robert Hansen, an aviation ordnance specialist with VMF 215, explained, "A Zero hitting a Corsair was like throwing rocks at a tank. A Corsair hitting a Zero was like a shotgun blast through a paper screen door." As 1943 progressed, the Corsair began to establish its dominance in the Solomon Islands campaign. Marine Corsair squadrons adopted aggressive tactics, actively seeking combat rather than merely providing defensive cover. The Cactus Air Force, the collective name for Allied air units on Guadalcanal, began to push Japanese air power back toward Rabaul, their main base in New Britain. Major Robert Owens, commander of VMF 215, developed a tactical doctrine specifically for Corsair operations that was soon adopted throughout the Marine Corps. Maintain altitude advantage when possible. Use speed to engage and disengage at will. Never turn with a Zero below 250 knots. Use diving passes followed by zooming climbs. Fight in pairs, with one aircraft covering the other. This doctrine, combined with the Corsair's performance advantages, resulted in increasingly lopsided victory ratios. By the end of 1943, Marine Corsair squadrons were routinely achieving 6:1 or better exchange rates against Japanese aircraft. The Japanese struggled to adapt. An intercepted communication from Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa to the Combined Fleet Headquarters in September 1943 revealed their dilemma. American Corsair fighters now control airspace in the Solomon Islands sector. Their superior speed, climbing ability, and diving power make conventional intercept tactics ineffective. Recommend immediate development of higher performance fighters and modification of air combat doctrine. But Japan's industrial capacity couldn't match the American production miracle. While the Japanese did develop improved fighters like the Kawanishi N1K1, J. Sheridan, known to the Allies as George, they couldn't produce them in sufficient numbers to change the equation. By early 1944, the situation had become even more dramatic. American industrial output reached levels that would have seemed impossible in 1941. The three factories producing Corsairs delivered 537 aircraft in January 1944 alone, more than Japan's total fighter production for that month. The quality of Japanese pilots also declined precipitously as veterans were lost and replacements received increasingly abbreviated training. By 1944, new Japanese pilots were receiving just 120 hours of flight training, compared to over 300 hours for their American counterparts. Lieutenant Alexander Vratiou, now flying from carriers after the Corsair was finally cleared for carrier operations in April 1944, described the change. In 43, you'd face Japanese pilots who really knew what they were doing. By mid-44, we were encountering guys who barely knew how to fly, let alone fight. Some of them would break formation as soon as we appeared and try to run for home. The culmination of the Corsair's dominance came during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, derisively nicknamed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots. Over the course of 2 days, American fighters, primarily Hellcats and Corsairs, shot down over 300 Japanese aircraft while losing only 29 of their own. Commander David McCampbell, who shot down 7 Japanese aircraft in a single engagement during the battle, later said, "They kept coming in, wave after wave, and we just knocked them down. It wasn't so much a battle as an execution." By war's end, the final statistics told an astonishing story. Corsair pilots had shot down 2,140 Japanese aircraft while losing only 189 Corsairs to enemy fighters, a kill ratio of more than 11 to 1. Including all combat missions, the overall ratio reached an unprecedented 19 to 1. The highest of any American fighter aircraft. The story of the Corsair is ultimately one of transformation, not just of an aircraft, but of the men who flew it and the nation that built it. What began as a useless plane, rejected by the very service that ordered it, became the most effective fighter aircraft of World War II. Major Gregory Boyington, who had once derided the Corsair as the ensign eliminator, ended the war with 28 aerial victories, most of them in the F-4U. "I learned to love that bent-wing bird," he wrote after the war. "Once you understood its quirks, there wasn't anything in the sky you couldn't handle." The transformation extended to the industrial base that produced the Corsair. At peak production in 1944, the combined Vought, Goodyear, and Brewster factories were delivering 650 Corsairs per month. A single Vought production line could assemble a complete Corsair in just 82 man-hours, down from over 450 hours in 1941. As combat intelligence officer Lieutenant James Michener, who would later become a famous novelist, noted, "The Japanese built a better airplane in 1941, but we built a better airplane factory." In the end, that made all the difference. The Corsair's journey from useless to unbeatable reflected larger American values: pragmatism, adaptability, and an unyielding determination to overcome obstacles through innovation and sheer productive capacity. It represented the transformation of America itself from a nation still recovering from the Great Depression to the arsenal of democracy. When the last Corsair rolled off the production line in December 1952, the type served with distinction in Korea as well. 12,571 had been built, in 15 variants spanning 3 manufacturers and 12 years of production. It was the longest production run of any U.S. piston-engine fighter in history. The pilots who flew the Corsair into combat never forgot her. Kenneth Walsh, who scored 21 victories in the F4U and earned the Medal of Honor, perhaps summed it up best. She was like a difficult woman, hard to handle at first, but once you earned her trust, she'd do things for you no other could match. And she'd bring you home when nobody else could. The Japanese understood this transformation as well. As Captain Mitsuo Fukuda, who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor, reflected after the war. The turning point came when American industry achieved full production and your inexperienced pilots gained combat wisdom. The Corsairs symbolized both, a difficult aircraft made excellent through engineering persistence, flown by pilots who learned to use its strengths and avoid its weaknesses. When we saw those bent wings appearing over our bases with increasing frequency, we knew the war was lost. From Henderson Field in 1943 to Tokyo Bay in 1945, the Corsairs' distinctive silhouette, the inverted gull wings that had once been mocked as ungainly, became a symbol of American air supremacy. The useless plane had become the deadliest fighter in the Pacific, a transformation that mirrored America's own journey from unpreparedness to unstoppable force. In the final analysis, the Corsairs' 19-to-1 kill ratio wasn't just a statistical achievement. It represented the culmination of American industrial might, engineering innovation, tactical adaptation, and the courage of the pilots who flew an imperfect machine to perfect victory. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.